Saturday, November 19th, 2022, was Transgender Day of Remembrance. A day in the trans community of mourning and remembering the transgender people who we have lost. A day where we trans people stop to look at how our community over the past year has been diminished by those who have been removed from it, often too soon. This year, I was asked to participate in a live stream event to commemorate this day, and my job during the ceremony was to read the names of the trans community members who died in the month of November 2021. I had to say their names, say where they were from, and most importantly, how they died. I only had a single month of names to say, but the list was so long that it took me around 10 minutes to get through them all. With each name, at least initially, harder to say than the last. Veronica Martinelli was stabbed in São Paulo, Brazil, February 25th, 2022. What hurt the most, though, wasn't saying their name, but was saying how they died. Too many were murdered, killed, beaten, some were even stoned. Those were the most common causes of death on that list. The next most common was suicide. Those who suffered so much in a society that would not accept them, nor able to get the care or attention they deserved, either from those who were supposed to love them, from the professionals in healthcare fields or their schools who were supposed to help them, or the institutions around them that were supposed to facilitate their lives, or elsewhere. So, in response, they decided to end their suffering, believing that they didn't have any other way out, because they felt alone and isolated from each other. A person whose name we do not know, age 12, died by suicide in Milton Keynes, Berkhamshire, United Kingdom, February 6th, 2022. And with their deaths, our community was diminished by those who failed or actively took these beautiful people from us. But that is not what I wanted to talk about with this video. Because that very same day, a person entered an LGBTQ nightclub, Club Q, in Colorado Springs, Colorado, with a gun, and injured 25 people, and killed Derek Rump, Daniel Ashton, Kelly Loving, Ashley Paw, and Raymond Green Vance. Often, the response to the all-too-common event of a mass shooting in the United States from those in power, especially those in the Republican Party, though certainly this is not limited to them, is to wish the victims and their families thoughts and prayers.
We're with you. You are in our prayers, and I know you are in the prayers of the American people.
By the way, I don't apologize for thoughts or prayers. I will lift up in prayer people who are hurting, and I believe in the power of prayer, and the contempt of Democrats for prayers is an odd sociological thing.
A meaningless gesture that does nothing in the face of an increasing and continuing trend of people going out and enacting violence in hopes of being the hero, or enacting a form of power upon the world. Even further, there are calls to not politicize the deaths. Now is not the time. It's the time for grief and for mourning.
Pattern we've seen from our Democratic colleagues is that inevitably when a shooting occurs, such as the horrific, bigoted, racist shooting in Buffalo, which all of us are horrified by, Democrats can't help but follow then White House Chief of Staff Rahm Emanuel's adage of never let a good crisis go to waste.
They had all the assets and resources to go, have a big spectacle, visit the victims, but then also give a speech. Climbing atop the dead bodies, using them as his political platform in one of the most cynical and exploitative displays we've yet seen from this White House, and that's saying a lot.
You have to ask yourself, who behaves like that? What sort of person uses mass murder as an excuse to give a campaign speech or seize more political power?
This would be laughable if it wasn't so angering, given that the reasons for these attacks are often motivated by politics, sometimes indirectly, sometimes very directly, such as with a shooter who wrote a manifesto and went out of his way to a black community in Buffalo, New York, to kill black people specifically. But these responses of giving thoughts and prayers or don't politicize the deaths were not the responses to the Club Q shooting.
Like, I really don't care that those people got killed. And you're like, that sounds really hateful, Pastor. Well, it is hateful because I do hate them. Because they're a menace and a wart on the rear end of society. And there's nothing redeeming about them whatsoever.
But even by their version of events, if it's causing this much chaos and violence, why do you insist on continuing to do it? If according to you, it's like putting people's lives at risk, if the effort to have men cross-dress in front of children is putting people's lives at risk, why are you still doing it? Is it that important to you?
Out the truth, indisputably, and the truth is that some adults in this country, apparently a growing number, have a deeply unhealthy fixation on the sexuality of children. When you say that out loud, you get people killed. That is what Brandy Zadrozny is saying. And by saying that, Brandy Zadrozny and the many people like her are effectively defending that same deeply unhealthy fixation on the sexuality of children. By the way, it's absolutely real. You're not imagining that. It's happening.
Drag is inherently sexual and ideological. It is burlesque, and it's not appropriate to bring your child to a burlesque show. You disgusting freaks.
Listen, we're in America. We can say whatever we want. And I'm not inciting violence, so don't even try to go there.
So how did we go from thoughts and prayers to the LGBTQ community after a mass shooting in Orlando, Florida at an LGBTQ nightclub?
We're dealing with a tragedy right now. Our prayers go out to everybody impacted. Law enforcement's doing their job.
To just a few years later, people saying,
That club got shut up the other day. Now, am I sad that 5 homos got shot? No, I'm not sad at all. As a matter of fact, I think it's a good thing.
that is ultimately what this video is going to hope to examine. But first, let's examine why this shooting happened at all. As of this recording, we do not yet know directly the reason this shooter did this horrific action. However, we do know this person expressed homophobia in the past.
Xavier, a friend and neighbor of Aldrich, providing this video to ABC News, showing the suspect firing an AR-style rifle at a shooting range. Xavier telling ABC he heard Aldrich make homophobic remarks and showed him their guns.
That's when, he told me it's not the guns that you got to be afraid of, it's the people.
But the larger thing that we learned about his online identity was he was in an internecine feud, I would say, with a hate site called Encyclopedia Dramatica. That site has been tied to two different mass killings. One is a guy named William Atchison back from 2017. He shot up a school in New Mexico, killed 2 people. He was a sysop or an admin at that website. What's notable about this website specifically is that it has a kill count for mass shooters. And it's almost like a high score thing. There's actually a section of the site called high scores. And if you target gay people or minorities, they note that with slurs in the profile. And they have updated his profile to note that as well. He was threatening to do a mass shooting and have and making a bomb in the basement. They called the police on that. The grandmother did as well. So this is what we've learned in the past couple of days. It's just slowly dribbling out now.
Yeah, I mean, I guess my top line here is just like the worst, darkest parts of anywhere that you could be spending time on the internet.
And we know this shooting comes after growing rhetoric around the transgender and LGBTQ community in the United States. Over the past few weeks, months, years, the LGBTQ and specifically the transgender community have been continually sexualized, vilified, and dehumanized. Firstly, the narrative around us has seen our bodies as inherently sexual.
Okay, so it's the fetish of having a vagina and embodying the body of a woman. So it's about literally wanting to be a woman or believing that you are. So you have a sexual fantasy and you're turned on by yourself as a woman.
Mm.
Right. Okay.
You look a bit sick. Come on.
Or excited, you never know.
Depends. I mean, there's new frontiers every day, Posey. So that being the case, right, to what extent do you personally think that people identifying as a woman have this condition, and why do you think that?
So I think it's probably a really large number. So we used to call them transsexuals and transvestites. And I think we knew that transvestites had a fetish. But now we have to pretend that that's not right, and it's stunning and brave.
Because this is what modern tolerance is so often about. It's about allowing people, usually men, to involve the whole world in their sexual fetishes. Many of the men who call themselves trans are really just autogynephiles, and many of them who call themselves non-binary are really just cross-dressing fetishists. It's as simple as that. And we have elevated the fetish to a lifestyle that we all not only have to tolerate, which we shouldn't even have to do that, but also affirm it.
Queerness, or being trans, is argued as being a fetish, rather than just something someone is, which is what it is, or something that someone can explore themselves as being. Take, for example, drag shows as evidence of this. Drag is not inherently sexual, but has been a staple of theater and art performance for centuries in numerous contexts. I know a lot of you out there think of a naked nude performance or a burlesque show when you hear the words drag or drag queens, and certainly some drag shows can be that, and they can be a lot of fun. But that's not what all drag shows are. Drag is just a form of performance art that's about pointing out and heightening our ideas of gender in that performance in a comical or over-the-top way in order to make fun of our societal gender norms.
And I think everyone can relate to that feeling that something about them isn't being acknowledged or isn't being seen. I think we make choices every single day about how we're going to show ourselves to other people, and so few of those choices are taken for ourselves. We hide things in case people see them. We want to accentuate the things that we think people might like. I describe drag as finding that thing that people don't see, that I want them to see, and making it the only thing that they can see. And this can be a really profound experience for anybody who has ever felt the need to conform for somebody else's comfort. It's hardly a surprise that so many LGBT people, at some point on their journey of self-discovery and play, have encountered drag and have played with drag as a way of discovering a little bit more about themselves. It's a great playground to do that. But I don't think it's limited to LGBT people. I think a lot of women can relate to that experience. I think a lot of people of color can relate to that experience. I think a lot of people with mental health issues can relate to that experience. People who have experienced trauma. Even you, cisgendered men, that's the word for you, by the way, in case you didn't know it. You're special too. Even you, cisgendered men, you, I'm sure, feel a pressure to conform to certain things in our society. What's wonderful about drag is that it allows us to let go of those things. And letting go of those things feels amazing.
And drag has appeared in numerous forms throughout the centuries, in everything from popular movies to Shakespeare plays. Yet, continually, if you've been listening to the news these past few weeks or months, we've heard growing rhetoric when things like drag is performed in front of kids, that it's seen as inherently inappropriate.
Before we move on to the drag show, and by the way, to people who complain, like, why are you addressing this or stuff going, there is nothing more important to Western civilization than the idea of mothers, fathers, husbands, and wives in the nuclear family. And if you don't see how dramatically insane it's become that we are now taking children to cross-dressing strip shows, if you don't see that as teetering on the edge of losing civilization, then you and I just disagree. Yeah.
One mother, called Brittany Mayer, noticed that her school board was supposed to be educating her children, had instead invited them to a, quote, family-friendly drag show, sponsored by a San Francisco Gender Reassignment Surgery Center and a nightclub.
At first, they've tried to claim that there's nothing sexual about any of this. It's all totally innocent and family-friendly. Yet this rationale doesn't stand up to scrutiny because drag is hypersexual by its nature.
But what makes it inappropriate? You see, if kids watch drag in a movie like Mrs. Doubtfire, that's totally okay. But if it's at a queer bar or in a queer supportive event, well, that's seen as taking kids to a sexual event. But if you've ever been to one of these events like Drag Queen Story Hour for Kids, it's like a clown reading a children's book.
To inspire a love of reading while teaching deeper lessons on diversity, self-love, and appreciation of others.
Everyone is different and everyone is not bad, said Scooter, who is a turtle. Different is special.
But this shows that it's not drag that is seen as the sexualization, it's the queer context that makes it sexual.
We know that the environment, the event, and everything associated with it was highly sexualized in nature because, first, it's a drag show, and second, it's at a gay club.
This shows how queerness is continually sexualized. Being queer is seen as inherently sexual by our mere existence. It's why you see the vilification of queer children's books. Just the idea of two boys ending up in some sort of romance is seen as sexual by nature.
Force parents to go against what they know and deeply to believe to be right, and trying to normalize it through innocent-looking children's books is wrong. And it demonizes the parents who don't co-sign on this ideology that they're trying to push.
I would not let my children read these books.
Yet when it's between a boy and a girl in a children's book, that's seen as totally fine and normal. And this sexualization is deeply, deeply dehumanizing, especially if we acknowledge that queerness and transness are just things that someone is. But to sexualize someone is to say that they aren't something inherently, but that who they are is a sexualized action. Not only that, we live in a culture here in the United States that deeply, deeply vilifies sex. Sex is seen as a taboo or even a bad thing, when it's again a normal part of human existence. So when someone calls being trans a fetish or sexual, well, that's not just sexualizing us. It's saying that we are sex, and if sex is bad and sex is an action, therefore, by being trans, we're not only bad, but we're choosing to do bad. All this reveals how this rhetoric of thinking of queerness and transness as inherently sexual plays off an ingrained assumption in our society. The assumption that being straight, monogamous, white, cisgender, and a dude are natural and normal things, and anything other than that is seen as a deviation, and in some and many cases, a choice, an action that someone is taking. To be queer is not something that someone is, but a choice that someone made, a sexual choice at that. Even beyond this though, since trans and queer bodies are seen as not the norm, they are dehumanized further, with many describing the bodies of trans people which are seen as different from this norm, especially trans people who have had surgeries like myself that allow us to live happier, healthy lives, are seen as mutilated, gross, disgusting, inhuman.
Now, she doesn't look like a woman, certainly, but neither does she look like a man. She's in sort of a gender purgatory. What we find is that we can reject the gift of our own physical selves by mutilating our bodies. But what we cannot do is create a new self. You know, when it comes to ourselves, we have only the power to maintain or destroy, not to create. If you choose to destroy yourself, you'll be left with this, which is what all trans people who get surgeries are left with. You're left living in a prison of your own making, stuck like that forever.
And those who provide us with these life-saving healthcares are called abusers as a result. Also begin to argue that being transgender is something that requires surgery, which is not what most trans people and trans-affirming healthcare professionals have ever argued. All of this is captured in Julia Serrano's recent book, Sexed Up, where she states, "Because queer people confound predator-prey roles and rules, we are, quote, marked by sex in many people's eyes. When I was growing up, people who fancied themselves tolerant would often say, 'I don't care what you do in your own bedroom, just don't flaunt in front of me,' in response to people who simply mentioned that they had a same-sex partner or who engaged in displays of affection such as hand-holding. These acts, which would have gone unnoticed or uncommented upon if they had occurred in the straight majority, were treated as if they were sexual acts that needed to be kept private. Even today, chaste kissing between queer couples is sometimes viewed as indecent, and books that include LGBTQIA characters are among the most targeted for censorship, even if they are bereft of any explicit sexual content. In other words, we are seen as sexual beings through and through, and because many people view us as fakes, they routinely invent ulterior sexual motives to explain who we are and what we do." Basically, as she states, if being trans or queer is a sexual choice, and our bodies are seen as inherently harmful, and that is something that we choose to do, well then that must be a result of two things. The first is mental illness. We must be mentally ill if we're choosing to augment our bodies in such a gross and disgusting way.
And transgender would be a mental health issue. So those people who say I'm bigoted, I will say you're insane and you're doing the people harm by doing that.
The whole idea of transgender is something that we've invented. We've invented this category of someone. What does transgender mean? It means you're beyond gender. That's a category that we've invented. What you have are people who are confused. And I don't think that God is the author of that confusion. It's more so that our flight from God and from the truth has resulted in all manner of confusion, including this one. I don't know. I mean, are you born a kleptomaniac, for example? I suppose if you talk to a neurologist, they might say that some people have a predisposition to that. I think that, so it's possible that something has gone wrong in the brain from birth.
The second thing, though, especially when we talk about transness and queerness in the context of children, that to get people to be trans or queer is coerced. Again, as Julia Serrano points out, some straight people fear they might be turned queer by interactions with queer people, even if no actual sex or intimacy takes place. On an intellectual level, most of us understand that an individual's gender identity and sexual orientation will not magically change if a queer person unexpectedly propositions or interacts with them. If this were true, there would inevitably be queer rogues running around propositioning people willy-nilly in an attempt to turn them all queer. Okay, I know Julia Serrano wrote this in sincerity, but I believe she probably just forgot that the grave robber from Repo the Genetic Opera exists.
It's the 21st century. Pure.
If ever there was a roguish queer turning people gay, there you go.
And the Zydrate gun goes somewhere against your anatomy. And when the gun goes off, it sparks and you're ready for surgery.
Anyways, jokes aside, continuing on. Yet, on a gut level, many straight people do react to these incidents as though their own gender and sexuality have been brought into question or compromised. I'd argue that this is because people imagine that queer stigma is capable of contaminating others. A second recurring reaction is that queer people are often imagined to prey not only on straight adults, but also on children. Research has demonstrated that queer people are no more likely to commit acts of child sexual abuse than straight people. Thus, these preying upon children claims are nothing more than a defamatory stereotype, one that has been weaponized against other marginalized groups as well. Historian Warren Bloomfield writes at length about the parallels between how LGBTQIA+ and Jewish people have been depicted by the straight Christian majority, including how both groups have been accused of acting as dangerous predators concentrated on ensnaring, torturing, and devouring primarily women and children of the dominant group. As Serrano points out, this is often why you will see stigmas against trans people focused on trans women entering women's spaces and hurting them.
That looks like for women, the way this is playing out, like let's take Title IX for instance. Okay, so I paid for my college education with a basketball scholarship. There was recently a 6'7" male who identifies as woman who took a women's basketball spot on a women's basketball team. It's happening in weightlifting. There's currently a volleyball player who's trying to get on the women's Olympic team. And so when gender identity wins, I believe that women always lose. You're not going to see a female, regardless if she identifies as trans or not, on the NBA, in the NFL. Women are going to, it's a power dynamic, and women are on the losing end of that. And so when we're talking about compassion, I think that we really need to look down the pike a little bit more, because I think there's this we want to be loving to everybody. But it's not loving to embrace something that's going to cause a lot of harm.
Which is itself a stereotype, and why so much of the worry about the children narrative focuses exclusively on those who are perceived to be girls by society. Either trans men who are seen as coerced into getting irreversible surgeries, or cis girls who are seen as harmed by queer or transness as either being seen as prey for sexual predators, or, again, coerced into a queer or trans lifestyle.
This is happening to parents all across the country. Teenage girls all of a sudden deciding with their friends that they're trans, wanting surgeries and hormones and getting them. And at first I thought, I don't need this. And so I tried to get another journalist to take it up, a real investigative reporter. I'm an opinion journalist usually. That's what I've done. And I couldn't get someone to take it up.
Because it's such a minefield. Because
Yeah, because it's a minefield, because for some reason the activists who are not representative of transgender adults that I've met at all, but the activists have convinced the world that because, they object to anyone's transition being questioned, we can't talk about a mental health issue facing teenage girls.
Thus, we see things like educators in school who are trans or queer have been called abusive just for being around kids.
Imagine walking into your child's classroom and you see this. What do?
I am starting year 6 of teaching today. Super excited.
Trans-affirming healthcare to trans kids, hell, even parents who allow their child to explore the simple possibility of their identity, be it trans or queer, which, by the way, exploring identity is the main adventure of being a child, well, that is denounced as child abuse, with many laws attempting to be enacted in places like Texas that would take children away from their parents.
This is a family utterly consumed in a tornado of dysfunction and delusion, and her children are caught in the middle of it, being used, exploited, abused. In saner times, of course, they'd be taken from the home, the kids would, and their parents would be put in prison. I mean, those kids would be better off in foster care. They'd be better off in a loving home with adoptive parents, but even foster care would be better for these kids than being in a home with these abusive parents.
There have even been attempts by people to try to have parents be called out by those in their community if they have a trans-affirming child, being policed by the community members around them, to find the others, the people who are expressing bad ideas in their community.
You felt completely okay with it from the beginning?
100%. I think it was around age 7, early age 7. We were driving to church, and my child just said, "Hey, everybody in the car, I'm going to start using they, them pronouns. That's who I am now."
Wow.
This was so natural to them, even though as a parent, the hate that the LGBTQ plus community gets, my immediate fear around that was, oh my God, is my child going to be allowed to grow up safely? And I put it out of my mind. And that's unfortunately a conversation I now have to revisit daily. Is my child actually safe in Texas, just being authentically who they are? And it's just these extremist leaders who now make me question my child's safety every single day.
All this is why the rhetoric recently around trans and queer folks has been changing to something else. The conversation around grooming.
Any schools become what are essentially grooming centers for gender identity radicals.
If you really want to talk to a 5-year-old or a 7-year-old or an 8-year-old about their sexuality and gender, that's on you. You're a pervert. You're a weirdo. I don't give a damn if you're a teacher.
Like maybe teach the kids to read before you tell them to go trans. You shouldn't be talking to kindergartners about gender identity, especially if you're not their parents. That's creepy. You should be arrested for that.
Look, there's a reason why the Democrats are treating this bill like it's the apocalypse. All we're telling them is you can't groom young children, and to them it's Armageddon, and that's because they know they have to indoctrinate the kids into this madness very, very young.
Again, as Serrano states, since LGBTQIA+ people differ from the norm with regards to our sex, gender, and/or sexuality, our stigma is often viewed as inherently sexual in nature. Hence the ease with which social conservatives reappropriate language, such as groomer, intended to describe actual sexual violence and deploy it against us, even in entirely non-sexual context. If we don't see queer or trans people as something existing, but as something that is created, as something that is also sexual and bad, then having kids at a drag queen story hour or queer people existing around children is not, in fact, a chance to allow queer kids to feel affirmed by having representation, or a chance to allow straight kids to see that queerness is safe and normal, which is what it is, but it's an attempt by those who believe this line of thought that this is actually turning kids gay and trans. And these people point to more trans and gay kids coming out today as evidence of this transing of the children, instead of realizing that there aren't more queer or trans kids than there were before, or that someone is making kids into being gay or trans, but that there are just more who feel safe enough to come out as trans because they've had representation, because they see it's an okay thing to be, or because of that representation they have the language to articulate what they've always felt. And that's a beautiful thing. Instead, though, being trans or gay around someone, well, that's a sexual act. Breaking someone's consent, a coercive act, attempting to influence others by our mere existence. Yet on top of this, because they've successfully argued the idea that being trans requires surgeries and that surgeries themselves are mutilation and abuse, then they must be forcing surgeries, abuse, on children.
Admitted performing double mastectomies on children for no medical reason at all. There is no scientific justification for sexually mutilating kids.
This isn't true. Most of the time, many trans kids are just exploring their gender identity.
What do you think are the most common misconceptions when it comes to gender-affirming treatments?
Rachel and I have both talked about this. Transition for young kids is so low stakes and simple. It's literally just wearing clothing that makes you feel good. It's using a name, maybe a different name, maybe the same name, that makes you feel good. It's wearing your hair a certain way. And I think the intention here is, from political extremists, is to promulgate the most shocking rhetoric available to scare people into thinking that dangerous things are happening with transgender kids and transgender people. It's really not. All of this is considered safe, evidence-based, standard practice, medically necessary care. And it's highly individualized and personalized, and it should remain private. You know, at the end of the day, no child's medical care should be weaponized for political gain. No child. Every child deserves the ability to have private medical care and to not have it publicized and politicized.
At the very most, they're put on puberty blockers, which have been shown repeatedly to be safe. Though these rhetorics will often attempt to lie about the safety of things like puberty blockers, often in very over-the-top ways. So take, for example, how the Daily Wire recently posted a story that Matt Walsh himself shared on his Twitter in late August of 2022 that linked the puberty-blocking drug Lupron that has been given to transgender kids in some instances was linked to thousands of deaths, 6,300 to be exact, according to the FDA. This story makes it sound like thousands of transgender kids were being killed by puberty-blocking drugs and that thousands and potentially even more were in danger of being killed. Except, if you look into the story, the drug is also given to terminally ill cancer patients who are fighting hormone-sensitive cancers like prostate cancer, and that those thousands of deaths reported by the FDA are likely them, not transgender youth. Even beyond this, much of the time, they lie about trans surgeries being performed on children, saying that kids are getting them easily and all the time.
Logically, we've made it far too easy for kids to take this path, long before they're ready psychologically or emotionally to make such a life-altering decision. Testosterone is easily obtained by today's teens. In Oregon, a 15-year-old can walk into a gender clinic. Yes, there are now gender clinics all over the country, and walk out the same day with a prescription for testosterone without her parents' permission.
The word, then is he old enough to be introduced to a concept like transgenderism? If he can't understand bigots, can he understand what it means for a boy to have a girl mystically trapped inside him?
This isn't true. Many of these places that these people have argued that these children are getting surgeries at don't perform those surgeries on kids at that age.
They do not perform those procedures for anyone under the age of 18. Boston Children's Hospital says it is proud, though, to be home to the first pediatric and adolescent transgender health program in the United States. The hospital, though, now is working with law enforcement to try to better protect its staff in the face of these lies.
And this also ignores the fact that most trans people can barely afford surgeries, and if they can, or it's covered by their insurance, there are typically years of waiting periods and many healthcare checks that happen beforehand, like having to go to see a therapist, and also generalized guidelines for age limits for surgeries, often around 18 years or older. The goal of this line of thought is to argue that we aren't human and actively and always evil.
So when I sit here and say this is destruction, what they say is, well, yeah, thanks for noticing. Destruction of the so-called gender binary, destruction of truth, of science, destruction of beauty, destruction of society, of civilization.
How is this different from pedophilia?
Well, it sounds like it's one and the same. And, you know, that's why I made it really clear that you can slap labels on anything. You can make anything family friendly that you want. And that's the danger of this ideology, is that we're being told to use new terms and new language, which is I think we do a disservice when we play by those rules. We need to
Yes.
stand up and use the words as the words that we know what they mean. And what those adults are doing is they're pimping out our kids to gender reassignment clinics, and they're pimping them out to 21 plus nightclubs.
Hitler would have been a self-loathing,
yes,
drag dancer with children. That's what we are saying. So if anyone here is, if anyone here is more like Hitler, most like Hitler, one could argue, it's these people abusing children.
So, if that's the case, if someone has fallen down this rabbit hole rhetoric of lies and disinformation around trans people that we're inhuman monsters who are breaking consent and grooming your children, well then, if you believe that, isn't violence, whether it be physical, verbal, mental, societal, or political, isn't that justified in order to stop us?
Now, if it seems like they're casting the widest imaginable net in order to catch the most children they can and put them all on a path to sterilization and butchery before they can even talk, well, that's because that's exactly what these monsters are doing. And they've done it up until this moment without much resistance from the public. But that has to end. We have to stop making it so easy on them. And that's why I'm in the very early stages of trying to organize a national coordinated effort to fight back against this evil.
That thought is what all this leads to. Isn't violence justified? That is the natural conclusion to this rhetoric. It has to be. The idea that is left unspoken at the end of this line of thought. And those who stoke this rhetoric around trans and queer people know that this must be the end catharsis of this line of thought, that it must inherently lead to justifying violence. Groups like Libs of TikTok or Matt Walsh and numerous others who have spread this line of reasoning have led to mass harassment of individual trans people or organizations that support us, like Boston's Children's Hospital. So much so that the hospital itself had a bomb threat.
Children's hospitals around the country are butchering, mutilating, and sterilizing their young patients. So according to Boston Children's Hospital, literally every toddler who has ever been born or will ever be born is trans.
Boston Children's Hospital says its staff is being threatened and harassed now after far-right activists on social media posted misinformation, claiming they perform gender-affirming hysterectomy procedures on young girls. The hospital says it's not true. They do not perform those procedures for anyone under the age of 18. Boston Children's Hospital says it is proud, though, to be home to the first pediatric and adolescent transgender health program in the United States. The hospital, though, now is working with law enforcement to try to better protect its staff in the face of these lies.
However, people like Matt Walsh who say this rhetoric will say, well, I've denounced violence and I didn't know that this must be the end result of all of this rhetoric.
I've publicly disavowed violence numerous times. Have you disavowed the violence directed at me as a result of you inciting your followers against me? Let's see you disavow violence, and until then, shut the fuck up, you lying hypocrite.
The practice, but to call for critics of the practice to be silenced on the grounds that we're engaging in harassment and incitement. This is what Christopher Rufo, I think, aptly calls discourse engineering, and we're seeing it play out. We've seen it play out many times, but perhaps rarely as starkly and blatantly as it has this week. And it always follows the same basic path, right? The left engages in some kind of outrageous, sickening behavior. They get away with it for a long time, right? And but they keep pushing the envelope, and eventually they go too far, and people notice, and then a public backlash follows. And but then the media comes along and ignores the actual reason for the backlash, completely sidesteps the criticisms that the critics are actually making, and instead cries about harassment and incitement, and calls on more powerful institutions like big tech to deplatform and silence the critics.
They publicly wash their hands of any culpability, saying, like, I'm not saying that I'm calling for violence, and denying the idea that they must know that by saying these things it inherently leads to the idea that you must enact violence.
Obviously a not at all subtle attempt here to draw a direct connection between my monologue that I gave on the show a couple days ago and the supposed violent threats against the Children's Hospital. Did I tell anyone to go do anything violent? Of course not.
But them saying that they don't realize this is, in fact, a lie. You see, as my friends Kaylee and Conrad and Little Hoot discussed in this video, even if we were to give people like Matt Walsh or Libs of TikTok or others every benefit of the doubt that maybe they do believe that they couldn't have caused violence with this rhetoric, After the first time that it happens, they can't deny that it is possible. After the second time that it happens, they can't deny that it isn't likely. And after the third, well, then you know what you're doing. And we're well past the third time. But as I said, they know this, and they actually stoke it. That's why folks like Matt Walsh gleefully spread contact information of those they wish their followers to harass and target.
Earl is a PhD candidate at University of California, Santa Cruz. Now, I said last week that I'd give the leadership there a day to respond and to tell us what steps they would take to address this before I started giving out their contact information. Well, they never did address it, and I was out for a week. So they actually ended up getting a week. And now it's time to escalate.
Matt Walsh will spew all this rhetoric about how things like the Boston Children's Hospital is transing the children and grooming them, and then will put up the literal contact information for that hospital on his show to thousands and millions of viewers because he knows that they will go out and enact violence in the name of this rhetoric.
I don't know what's going on, and I have a child that's in the NICU.
Parents like Patricia MacArthur worried while waiting outside Boston's Children's Hospital Tuesday night as police set up a perimeter following a bomb threat. The bomb threat follows a series of other threats made to the Children's Hospital 2 weeks ago, spurred by social media posts spreading misinformation, claiming the doctors were performing hysterectomies on children, a claim the hospital has repeatedly denied.
Libs of TikTok does much the same, creating a new target of harassment ire every single day whenever they post a new video. This is what stochastic terrorism is. It allows those spreading this rhetoric the plausible deniability by not stating the end final point that this rhetoric leads to, because they know it isn't necessary, because they've been dog whistling for it the end time and know that that final step is something that will happen in the listeners' heads at the end anyways. And this plausible deniability has been the point. The right has spent years laying the groundwork for this. Yet this tension, this gap between this point and this point cannot last forever. The people spewing this rhetoric cannot offer thoughts and prayers by pretending they care on the one hand continually, while also on the other escalating rhetoric against us, because those two ideas are at odds with each other. It needs to find a resolution. And we are starting to see that resolution begin to play out. As I said before, after the Club Q shooting, meaningless thoughts and prayers were not offered. Instead, the rhetoric from those who have been spewing this disinformation and anti-trans talking points have now switched to something else. The groomers deserved it.
The 5 people who were killed in the nightclub that night, there is no evidence at all that they were Christians. And so assuming that they were not, that they had not accepted the truth of the gospel of Christ and affirmed Jesus Christ as the Lord of their life, they are now reaping the consequences of having eternal damnation, and that is far, far greater, and we should be having that conversation instead of just the tragedy of what happened to the body. We need to be talking about what happened to the soul and the fact that they are now in eternal separation from our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ.
That club got shut up the other day. Now, am I sad that 5 homos got shot? No, I'm not sad at all. As a matter of fact, I think it's a good thing that they're not here anymore to molest kids. And I'm not condoning anybody to do anything like that. I don't believe it's right to take the law into our own hands, and I've said that so many times. But here's what I won't be upset about. I'm not gonna be upset when someone that hates God and actively is promoting against God and hates his guts and molests children, even if it is just their eyeballs, to have to see these freaks writhing around and you know, doing all these crazy dances in front of children, and then afterwards reading them a book or something.
It seems that around 10 p.m. Club Q posted that they were having an all-ages drag show the next day. About 2 hours later, the shooter came in. People keep calling for wood chippers, and this is what happens. We shouldn't tolerate pedophiles grooming kids. Club Q had a grooming event. How do we prevent the violence and stop the grooming?
Strong legislation to protect children and an armed populace to protect themselves/their kin.
The idea that Tim Pool and Steven Crowder are spreading in their tweets that the drag show was a groomer event is vile on its face alone. as if the purpose of an event like that was to sexualize children. Yet, given that false starting assumption that they're making, the argument here that they're saying is because this club had a drag show, or a groomer event in their eyes, then those who attended the club on a completely different night, by the way, deserved to die. Absolutely fucking vile. This rhetoric is not dissimilar to when the police murder a black person. The first thing many in the media do is often find something that this person who was killed had done in the past that may have been considered wrong by society at large. Maybe they committed a crime years ago and were sent to jail, for example.
Blood test. If he was high on some drug, angel dust or PCP or something, then we'll know. And that's entirely possible. Entirely possible. You could take a lot more than 6 bullets and keep charging.
Just maybe the cop was right. Maybe he was getting beat up. We don't know what happened.
The girl was no saint either. He had told her to leave, and she continued to linger.
Maybe this officer was justified. Maybe this was a bad guy. Maybe he wasn't the gentle giant.
It's only when the police are involved in a shooting. Everybody wants to just race out there and condemn the cop.
And then this crime gets reported on repeatedly as if it's somehow relevant to the situation at hand and if it somehow justified someone's murder by police.
Often what we'll see is this smear campaign of these victims, which is bringing up events from their past, essentially dirt from their past, that almost justifies why they deserve their fate. You know, he was an addict, he was a criminal, he was a thug. So it really does take a concerted effort to portray them in a light that is not that.
On top of that, there's no discussion of the context of the original crime, despite the fact that it's completely irrelevant to the situation, or there's no discussion of how marginalized people are often forced into crime because they have no other recourse. No, the fact that they did a crime at one point is just used to justify their inhumanity and thus endorsing their death. And we are seeing something similar with queer people happening right now. Our society often vilifies what a marginalized person does, but not when anyone else does the same thing. In larger society's eyes, there is no such thing as a marked person, a person who is deemed other by society, a deviation from the considered norm, who is truly innocent. There's no such thing as a marginalized person who isn't questionable in some way. Yet this goes even further because the people spewing this anti-trans rhetoric and anti-queer rhetoric revealed what they want from this rising violence.
According to the left, the drag queen child combination has become dangerous. They say it's a lightning rod for violent backlash. Right? That's what they say. And it's greatly exaggerated, of course. Mostly it's invented out of whole cloth, actually. But even by their version of events, if it's causing this much chaos and violence, why do you insist on continuing to do it? If according to you, it's like putting people's lives at risk, if the effort to have men cross-dress in front of children is putting people's lives at risk, why are you still doing it? Is it that important to you? Now, as always, they try to flip the burden around on us. They demand that we explain why we object to children being exposed to drag queens, and we can explain it, and we have, and we will continue to, because it's very easy to explain. Drag is inherently sexual and ideological. It is burlesque, and it's not appropriate to bring your child to a burlesque show. You disgusting freaks.
In that clip, Daily Wire host Matt Walsh here is saying that if we believe that drag shows are the thing inciting violence against the queer community, then we, queer people, should just stop them and the violence will stop. But it's important to note, Matt Walsh and others have often used drag just as code for being queer or trans in public. Like drag shows, he calls all queer people and trans people inherently groomers by our existence.
The point of Drag Queen Story Hour and the supposed family-friendly drag shows is to turn your children queer. That is the goal.
So what he's arguing here is that for the violence to stop, then we must stop being out, stop being ourselves, stop being in public, force ourselves out of sight, fit ourselves back into the mold society has placed us in from birth, or disappear altogether. He doesn't care which, really. Yet this argument that he's making is again based on a false assumption. Drag shows aren't the thing inciting violence. You, Matt Walsh, are helping incite violence against drag shows and queer people. All you have to do to help stop the violence, or at least contribute to stopping the violence, is to stop lying about the trans community and stoking bigotry. But you won't. Because you know that by doing so, it gives you power. So what you're really saying is that you won't stop helping the violence unless trans and queer people stop being public, stop being out. Or better yet, stop existing at all. Because that's really what these folks want. On Tucker Carlson's show, a guest that Carlson platformed said this.
Right. I mean, it shouldn't have to be said. But what is anti-LGBTQ that these people need to understand, and what is putting our community in great danger, is, claiming that all of us support this and just associating all of us with this. Saying that groomer is an anti-LGBTQ slur. That is doing irreparable damage to us as a whole, and is putting a really large target on our backs. And unfortunately, the tragedy that happened in Colorado Springs the other night, it was expected and predictable. We all, within Gays Against Groomers, saw this coming from a mile away. Yeah. And sadly, I don't think it's going to stop until we end this evil agenda that is attacking children.
This woman is offering a choice here. Either we stop giving trans-affirming healthcare to trans people that has been proven over and over again to save lives, and go back to living an empty life that robs us of any meaning by removing our ability to express ourselves, or the shootings will continue. But it's not just the shootings that she's talking about either. What she's saying is that we stop existing or stop being in public or stop being ourselves, or they will continue to push for legislation that takes away life-saving healthcare. They will continue to lie about what that healthcare means, saying it's grooming or mutilation or abuse or mental illness or degeneracy. And they will go even further, taking our ability away to be in public, fight to take away our rights in sports, or even our ability to use a bathroom in public. It's all a desire to push us out of sight, or to be seen as worthy of the same ability to thrive as any other human being has. Us queer and trans people know that to force ourselves into the closet is a death sentence on its own, because you're telling us not to be us. You're telling us to be someone else, a cog, a mold, just an automaton moving about, performing a function, not being a person. Many of us know that that is what we'd be condemned to. And that is often why you will see a high suicidality rate in the trans community. That list of suicides that I read out on Trans Day of Remembrance. So we know that this choice that's being presented to us isn't a choice at all. It's a death sentence either way. Either you're asking us to stop living for ourselves, or telling us you'll do it for us. Death or suicide. It's not a choice. Either way, in either option, we are dead. Yet, despite all of this, despite what this ultimately does, despite literally saying people deserve to die, these people are allowed to continue saying all of that with impunity over and over and over again on some of the largest platforms, like Fox News, Twitter, YouTube, every platform. They are sexualizing, demonizing, and vilifying the queer community and praising our deaths while they backhandedly call for it. Hell, even the few platforms that have minutely pushed back against transphobia and homophobia are backtracking on it in some cases. Like with Jordan Peterson and others banned on Twitter for targeting the trans community being brought back by Elon free speech absolutionist Musk. And there are two reasons that this is the case. The first is money. Here on YouTube alone, Walsh's videos get thousands of views and advertising dollars. Not to mention the thousands and thousands of dollars the Daily Wire, PragerU, Fox News, and more spend on advertising money on this platform. Hell, other platforms like Shopify earlier this week in the wake of the Club Q shooting affirmed that they would still allow libs of TikTok to sell merchandise on their platform. Hate makes money just like all the rest, and capitalism is an amoral system that does not see ethics, it just sees monetization. And thus people are literally given a monetized incentive to hate. It gives them power. Yet, the second reason that all of this is allowed to continue goes back to the idea that trans people are not seen as the norm. We are seen as a deviation of humanity. So, saying things about us is just something that's up for debate. We're debating the trans idea, the trans ideology, the trans agenda. And thus, if our existence is up for debate because it's seen as a choice, then it's not something inherently protectable. Yet when queer people speak out about all of this, we get vilified further. For example, a month or so ago, I made a video about Matt Walsh where I pointed out exactly what has been happening, that he was calling for violence against trans people, which we are seeing more and more and more. And that video about him on my channel was hit with a community violation because I sexualized him. And this is just my video, but any trans person who speaks out about our treatment in these rhetorics and our treatment in society is seen as trying to stifle the debate. Why can't you let anyone argue with you? Come on, you just can't let anyone disagree with you. I'm sorry, I don't accept my identity as up for debate. Nor do I allow people to tell me I'm a groomer by my very existence and tell me that when I say no, that's fucked up that I'm trying to stop free speech. But when I do say that, I'm seen as the unreasonable one. And so trans people get harassed endlessly and targeted for speaking out and seen as unstable or ridiculous for plainly stating what is being attempted upon us, an attempt to control our bodies and lives, and an attempt to kill us. So to demonize and sexualize trans people, well, that's just a Tuesday. But a trans person speaking up against hate, that's ridiculous and isn't allowed. This aspect of it is crucial because part of this narrative is that for too long the left has been controlling the conversation about LGBTQ people.
What's interesting is that the number of people who really care about this issue enough to assault someone over it is tiny. And yet they have disproportionate power. 350 million people in the country, maybe 1,100 feel that way, but they're running everything. Why is that?
But we know this argument to be false. Trans people have never been able to control the conversation about our own bodies, and that certainly hasn't changed in the last few years. With constant lies used to control us, with legislation to violence to social stigmatization, our bodies and narrative have never been our own. At least not in the overriding cultural discourse. Though rest assured, we remember our stories for ourselves. Yet, this overriding narrative that the transes are the one in control is a necessary part of the violence-inciting rhetoric, because it compels people to fight not just for the children, but for their own voices, which they are being told are not being represented, when really all they're doing is denying someone else their voice, denying trans people our voice. Yet the dictation of transgender bodies has been the prevalence of these voices for so long, so for us to tell them that it's not okay is seen as oppression, seen as taking away something from them, because they've had it for so long.
For coming on. So you this stuff's in your face every single day. You're the target of a lot of this. You gotta wonder, the people trying to destroy your business and your life, like, they're a tiny percentage of Americans, aren't they?
They are, but they wield all the power.
So these people enact violence against us, believing that they're protecting others and reclaiming their own voice. But there's even more to this, because let's look at how those who incite violence treat the people who enact the violence in their name, the people who believe their voice is being denied. The people who do the harassment and send bomb threats to Boston's Children's Hospital, show up with guns to a gay club and kill people, so that those who spread this rhetoric can keep their hands clean. These violence enactors are fed a world filled with endless cycles of violence and believe that they can be the hero who can stop it. They're told that they're saving the children. They believe that they are doing good in the world, that they can recreate an idealistic past before all these queers came in and ruined it. All they have to do is stand up and fight for it. And as a result, they'll be remembered and their legacy will be secure. But in truth, they are tossed away just as quickly by those who stoke their anger. Carlson, Walsh, and others quickly condemned shooters.
That the shooter is an incoherent lunatic who apparently wore a hazmat suit to school for a week. He had threatened to shoot up his school a year before. A few weeks before the grocery store attack, he beat a cat to death, beheaded it, and then buried it in his backyard. And he bragged about this online, which is how we know that this happened. And he said that he felt blank after slaughtering the animal. Now, the shooter may have been racist. He was. But that's not the principal factor that drove him to become a mass murderer. He was and is a psychotic, violent, empty, nihilistic lunatic who, like every other kid in America, was locked in his home for months on end and encouraged to live his entire life online, even more than he already had been, presumably, up to that juncture.
Peyton Gendron was mentally ill. His classmates knew that. Gendron made strange facial expressions and said odd things in class. Last year, he showed up for school for a full week wearing a hazmat suit. Boots, gloves, everything, recalled another student. Police and school administrators understood perfectly well that Gendron was potentially dangerous. That's why they sent him to the psych ward. Even his own parents must have known that something was very wrong. Gendron's diary describes how his mother helped him bury a cat he had beaten to death in their garage and then beheaded with a hatchet.
The reason they do this is to promote the idea that these shooters are just lone wolves, mentally ill, and not connected to anything overall.
Talk about the view of these white gunmen as lone wolves. What that does is it separates them from the bigger problem. Of course, gun control is an issue. Of course, mental health is an issue. But the big problem here is white supremacist domestic terrorism. And oftentimes, these shooters will be described as a solo actor, even though they have referenced previous white supremacist shooters in their manifestos. And this is something that happens. It's a giving them the benefit of the doubt. It's not tying them to the bigger problem. It's not seeing them as much of a threat as other groups would be. So, for example, law enforcement does this too. We see this in a lot of systems. January 6th was planned all but out in the open, and yet law enforcement was not ready and waiting.
They're madmen, they say, even though these madmen use their own exact words in justification of violence. We saw it in Buffalo, with the shooter there creating a manifesto that cited white replacement theory, something that both Walsh and Carlson, among others, have parroted.
Does mention the so-called Great Replacement theory. And this is what they're trying to hang around the neck of Tucker Carlson, Fox News, really any conservative, myself included. Because Tucker Carlson and other conservatives have in the past pointed out that the Democrats have been very open about the fact that, you know, they want to minimize what they call whiteness in America. And they want to bring in voters, you know, from other countries. They don't want voter ID laws. You know, they want to be able to bring in the voters and have them vote because they know they're going to be voting Democrat. So they want to replace, especially white male voters, with voters who they think are going to be beholden to them. Now, this isn't a conspiracy theory. There's nothing wild or speculative about it. It's just a fact.
I know that the left and all the little gatekeepers on Twitter become literally hysterical if you use the term replacement, if you suggest that the Democratic Party is trying to replace the current electorate, the voters now casting ballots, with new people, more obedient voters from the third world. But they become hysterical because that's what's happening, actually. Let's just say it, that's true. I have less political power because they're importing a brand new electorate. Why should I sit back and take that?
We saw it also recently with the person who broke into the Pelosi household, how he feared a white genocide being pushed by the Hollywood elite. Again, something being parroted by those who incite this rhetoric.
Instead of making films that kids want to watch, they're actually making films that will indoctrinate them.
Their main, quote, goal as a company is now to teach kindergartens in Florida that they can, in fact, change their gender just by wishing it so. It makes you wonder if kids in Florida can consent to chemical castration with no parental involvement.
This isn't programming, this is propaganda for grooming.
And I would not be surprised if you learned that it was also behind the Club Q shooters' ideology. That's because this rhetoric creates a cult of death, of those who believe themselves to be a hero for a cause and thus needing to have a hero's death, and thus speed on the death of others in pursuit of it. But ultimately, they're not heroes. They're disposable, only seen as worthwhile to be used as they gleefully throw themselves into the machine to find purpose in their lives, lives that have been continually stripped of meaning by the world around them that has often disenfranchised them, while also simultaneously telling them that they deserve everything.
It's not that I actually dislike other people, it's just that they make me feel so uncomfortable. I've probably spent actual years of my life just being online, and to be honest, I regret it. I didn't go to friends' houses often or go to any parties or whatever. Every day after school, I would just go home and play games and watch YouTube mostly by myself. I only really turned racist when 4chan started giving me the fact that black people were intellectually and emotionally inferior.
Earlier in this video, we were talking about how queer people and other marginalized groups are sexualized. But in many ways, this same sort of sexualization happens to these men. These young men are told that they deserve sex, they deserve connection, they deserve to be around others, they are owed that. And yet, our society continually isolates them further and further. And thus, because they feel they are owed that, they become more and more frustrated, often sexually. The term incel has become a joke term in our society today, but there is a reason that it is a concept that resonates with people. It's because people feel like they are being isolated from something that they deserve. What they're being told they deserve is sexual connection, often with women, and seeing women as something that they are owed to them, and that everyone else is sort of taking that away from them. But what is actually being taken away from them is human connection to others, and thus feeling angry at everyone around them for not giving them that human connection. And that's what allows them to dehumanize everyone around them.
You know what happens when women don't ever, come to terms with themselves? bad shit happens. I don't know. Something the cops want to deny me trying to get her to be straight. Something is wrong about that. I don't see why these traditional ass motherfuckers think they can speak shit whenever it's this woke, belligerent LGBT shit that has her right now. And her father is controlling the bullshit. I just don't see it. I'm older than her fucking father. That's how I feel right now. I've lived this life. I've been the greatest. I've been down and I've been about. I don't know where this is going, but fucking snakes, man. She was gonna lure me into a trap whenever I was gonna go, you know, play a song for her. It's just how it is. But shout out to all my bros. I know that my dudes, you know, I'm really getting depressed recently, you guys. I feel like there's not faith in humanity.
This dehumanization caused by their anxiety and frustration is why they are able to act out violence against multiple marginalized groups. I've been talking mostly about the violence enacted against LGBTQ people throughout this video, but as the Buffalo shooter and many others have shown, violence isn't exclusively against the LGBTQ community. We're just one of the most vocally targeted groups right now, hence why there's a lot of vitriol and anger and violence being directed at trans and LGBTQ people, but it is by no means exclusive to us. But it's all built off of this sense of anxiety and fear, and then sublimating that on to a scapegoat that is being presented by the media in this way, through sexualization and dehumanization.
A belief that is instilled in them so that they can only feel purpose through causing pain.
I'll be honest, I do fear the attack. Fear of dying, fear of being unsuccessful, fear of the hero that stops me. I keep telling myself that this is the only way, and emotionally I feel that there is another path, but logically I know that there is none.
They are under the impression that they will become martyrs, and that their actions will make a difference. But their use is up as soon as they commit the act. If they survive, which they usually don't, their lives are shown to be meaningless to the people they did this in the service of, only useful for their violence and allowance of denial of culpability.
Now, is it true that the shooter in Buffalo was a white supremacist, as Biden claims? Yes, that's clear enough from his words and actions. Is it true that Biden or anybody else in the Democrat Party actually care about racism, extremism, or terrorism? No, that is clear enough from their words and actions, or lack thereof, as the case may be. The Democrats are, of course, very selective in the forms of violence, terrorism, and racism they denounce. Nothing to be gained politically from denouncing or even so much as acknowledging black supremacy, anti-white racism, and left-wing terrorism, all of which are significantly more common and mainstream than white supremacy and anti-black racism. Significantly more. Even when it comes to white supremacy, Biden's interest is not in simply denouncing it. His greater point is to denounce his political adversaries by connecting them to it and to this shooting. Never mind the fact that the shooter is an incoherent lunatic. He developed through this process a totally unintelligible worldview that no honest person could describe as right-wing or left-wing or any other wing. He's a demented, vacant human being, killing primarily for whatever sick thrill he derives from it. That's why he beheaded a cat only a few weeks before.
These shooters are pitiable, for they do violence against those who could be their allies in this fight, against those who cause actual harm. I pity them. But that is all that I give them. I will forget their name. They don't deserve to be remembered. They deserve to be forgotten forever. Even while I understand that they are a product of a system that uses them up to enact death. However, if they don't die, they can still become tools of rhetoric. After the shooting, the Club Q shooter's lawyers released a statement that said that the shooter was non-binary.
Overnight, we're learning from court filings from the suspect's defense attorney that the suspect identifies as non-binary and prefers to use the pronouns they, them.
This is rather surprising, considering numerous reports showed that the shooter was openly homophobic.
The suspect had talked about hate for the LGBTQ plus community before, and that he was, quote, not someone that he would bring his gay friends around. And so that...
What this feels like more is a play into right-wing rhetoric of LGBTQ on LGBTQ violence.
Why would someone who identifies that way attack a gay bar? Well, for many reasons, potentially. It's not at all unheard of for a member of the LGBT community to attack their own community.
And that non-binary people are inherently unstable. A way to create a narrative after the fact that these lawyers know exists and are playing into.
Know that the suspect considers themselves non-binary?
I personally don't believe that to be true, just because of, who I knew Andy to be.
In fact, this is actually a common tactic within far-right and alt-right radicalized areas. Many times you'll actually see sometimes people pretending to be transgender or non-binary in order to instigate fighting within the community, or to sea lion people into answering questions all the time.
But it's not for me to police someone's identity, so let's say they are non-binary. I completely and totally respect that. I have consistently argued that we do not misgender people, even those we hate. And there are many people within the trans and queer communities who do things against the queer and trans community. These people aren't on the same level as the shooter, but I take huge issues with trans people like Blair White, Buck Angel, or Caitlyn Jenner. I think they are willing to throw their community under the bus with misinformation and disinformation, and are often misinformed themselves, just so they can be treated better.
Really putting me down from my stance on a lot of these things and say I was anti-trans and on and on and on. So, I put out a tweet that said, well, at least I had the balls to stand up for women and girls in sports. Well, that goes viral, and it's been kind of all over. But I'm getting so tired of this woke world.
But even these people who I dislike, I never misgender them, ever. And that includes this shooter at Club Q. Even as I don't remember their name, I will respect their identity and their humanity. Yet many spewing anti-trans rhetoric, like Matt Walsh, have argued that we need to recognize the shooter as non-binary.
And there it is. A non-binary they-them with a porn star father. Not exactly my target audience. The left has no right to deny anyone's self-identity. That is the rule they established, and they must be held to it.
As if this isn't what trans people have been saying all along. Trans people are not the hypocrites here. Because it's telling that Matt Walsh and others only recognize a non-binary person when it fits their narrative. When every other time that they talk about non-binary people, they spend hours questioning that person's right to exist and identity. There are only two genders, they say.
What does coming out as non-binary mean? The answer is that it doesn't mean anything because non-binary is not a thing, unfortunately. There is a binary, and it's not possible to not be a part of it.
This showcases that Matt Walsh and others are quite capable of recognizing a non-binary person's humanity. They just choose not to.
What's even further telling is how folks like Matt Walsh argue that if the shooter's non-binary identity comes out as having not been true, that their new non-binary identity is what was coerced out of them.
And because not only the media, but local law enforcement and the Attorney General of the state have all gone on the record predicting that this was a right-wing crime, it seems likely to me that they'll find a way to force that motivation onto this guy, whether it's true or not. I wouldn't be surprised if we hear in the next few days that he has recanted his non-binary status after some, shall we say, persuasion from the powers that be. Wouldn't surprise me.
Basically, he's flipping his entire script of what non-binary is. Originally, he had argued that non-binary is inherently a coercion by other people. But this just showcases how Matt and others are willing to completely change their argument based on what serves their needs and sets themselves up to not be held responsible.
All of this shows that their dehumanization, their sexualization, their vilification, it's an active choice. But that's the goal of fascism. And this is fascism that we're talking about. If you hadn't caught on, I've been mentioning a lot of the signs of fascism here.
It calls for tradition and the idea that transness doesn't actually exist because it never existed before, quote unquote. The constant rejection of modernism and science and intellectualism. The fear of difference, which is evident in so much of what they say. The appeal to a frustrated middle class who feel like they have no purpose in life, giving them an obsession with a plot around society that frames them as the ones who should be in charge of society. The making of these people feel humiliated by those who they are told are in power above them, like quote-unquote trans people. A control and disassociation from one's sexuality through machismo and masculinity.
The cult of death, the creation of a hero mythology, the grand purpose or work that fuels a society, the requirement for endless violence. These are all signs of fascism as articulated in Umberto Eco's seminal essay, Fascism. And fascism requires a villain to function, someone to point its cycles of anger against. So, if we want to recognize this, what are we to do? Well, it requires that we have a conversation. One about self-defense. The conversation currently has now become LGBTQ people should arm themselves. I've seen a lot of people in the trans and queer community saying it.
This might be a hot take, but I seriously think minorities should start arming themselves. I can't see any of this getting better in the near future. Trans folks need to get a license to carry. The right have convinced themselves in their bubble that only they have guns.
Pains me to admit this, but like, you should be fucking armed. It would be irresponsible of me to say that you shouldn't. The more I see like, the John Brown Gun Club in places like Colorado or in Texas, putting armed defenders outside of events like this, the more I realize like it is almost a necessity. The current scene outside of a Patchouli Joe's in Denton, Texas, where transgender story time for children is being hosted. This was a couple days back, but yeah, this is what I'm talking about. Where at this stage, like left-wing armed defenders will go and park outside of these places.
And I've struggled with that. I built this channel and my life on empathy and caring for others, and I never want to lose that. Even in this video, despite my anger and rage in the things that I need to say, I have tried to see things from the point of view of even those who harm us. Empathy pulls us together and makes us this community, but we also face violence, and self-defense against that is justified. We are at a point where we are forced to point out how these people who spread this anti-trans rhetoric should be pushed back against. They should be made to feel bad, shamed, and unsafe in the way they make us feel unsafe. Yet when we do say that, we're seen as inciting violence, calling for hate. We're seen as the villains. For example, Little Hoot, a trans creator, was harassed and then personally banned from Twitter by Elon Musk for saying so. It's why even in this video, I feel like there is only so much that I can say. Despite the calls for violence against trans people daily, when trans people discuss self-defense in the name of this, well, that's fighting back against the status quo, and that can't be allowed. We are seen as products of an ideology, and those who stew violence are given plausible deniability that is given to them. And so they say they're being reasonable, and these other people acting violence, well, they're just individual actors, not the overriding rhetoric that we're stoking in our society today. And so trans people are seen as the enemies who are getting violent, not the system who is doing the violence against us that we are fighting against.
So what I will say is a paraphrase of what I said on Twitter, that I wish upon these people everything that they wish for queer people. And if that gets taken down for violations of terms of service on any platform like YouTube, then that platform has just tacitly admitted what this rhetoric really stands for. But even if they don't recognize that, which they won't, using this phrase I think is an important one, because it recognizes that what we are doing is self-defense against those who are calling for violence against us. It centers that we are willing to push back, but that we aren't doing it because we're the ones instigating it, but we are willing to push back. And there are many ways that we can and should push back. These people should be made to feel unsafe in the way that they try to make us feel unsafe.
Because otherwise that means it will continue to get worse. We need to stop it now. But that's a scary prospect. It's much easier instead to ignore the problem, to say that it's not happening, even if it's happening to your own community. That's what many people do. Ignore that this is a problem. Say that it doesn't exist, that fascism isn't here or growing. But for those of us who fascism is directly targeting, sometimes even then it's easier for us to say that we shouldn't fight back. That we can just instead find comfort in our community and find solidarity there. Protect ourselves by wrapping ourselves within, from the enemy without. But we can't keep doing that. And that realization has been something that I've been struggling a lot with. If you hadn't noticed, a lot of my videos end with this call for community. To say that we should recognize each other and love each other and care for each other. And that's something I deeply, deeply believe. And I will never stop calling for that. But it is easy for me to say, oh, we can take solace in our community, that we still have each other, and that can be enough. But the truth is, fascism will take that away too. They want to take us and separate us, remove our ability to find each other, to find ourselves isolated and alone. So to quiet ourselves by saying that we can find solace in our community, to not do anything in the face of this, to not recognize that it's even happening, that's just giving them time to do more and do worse and take more from us. They want to take everything so that all we are cogs working in a machine, dehumanized, only working in service of the powerful. Taking solace is not enough. Community is not a solace. But it is the way out, the way to stop this. We are stronger when we work together to fight back against fascism, to push it out and stand against it. We have seen this throughout history. When a community stands together, it is stronger. There are numerous examples, but we could go back to one that many in the queer community remember quite well, the Stonewall Rebellion, where queer people stood together and said no, and pushed back those who would oppress us and call for harm against us. We fought back, defending our community through community. That shows that we are stronger together. We can beat even the seemingly mightiest of force, because their power is actually weak. It's scared. It's afraid. Because that's what it runs itself on. Fear. It is afraid of us being together. But when I talk about the strength of community, I am not talking about the strength of just the trans community alone, though we are quite strong. What I am talking about is the community of all of us, every single person, together. It is not trans people and queer people and straight people each having our own differing communities that fight for ourselves. No, we are all one community that can come together to push back.
Even more pertinently, it's important to recognize that we are all part of each other's communities. Queer people are part of every single gender, racial, ethnic, and any other marginalized group, just as every other marginalized group is part of the queer community. We are not separate, but part of each other, as is all of humanity interconnected. Additionally, as I pointed out throughout this video, fascism will marginalize people in exactly the same way no matter which group they're a part of. They just pick which one that they're going to target right now that is deemed most acceptable by society at large. The people they have found most success in otherizing as something separate from the dominant version of humanity. But the same tactics are being used against all of us, whether they be Jewish people, people of color, women, or elsewhere. So recognizing this, it's important to note that when you fight back for one group, you're fighting back for every group.
And we can succeed. And we have direct recent evidence of this. Because it was not the police, the enforcers of state power, who continually and often fail to stop shooters in a timely manner, because that's not really what they're there to do, but it was a trans woman and a straight ally who stopped this man from continuing to kill at Club Q.
Listen, first of all, I just want to say this is in no way about me. My daughter is grieving the loss of her boyfriend. He was in our lives for 6 years. Raymond was a great young man. He was in his way to do some amazing things. And for me right now, it's about healing. I have 2 friends still in the hospital that were shot. My best friends here in the Springs. My whole Colorado Springs family was there. And so what I think I was doing was protecting my family, which is what I do.
Take solidarity, not within a community, but between communities, to stop fascism and violence. Yet, as I said, fascism is scared, and it knows that this is the way to stop it. So, fascism chooses to pit us against each other, to keep us focused on each other. Fascism knows that to exist, they must have us fight and hate each other in order to keep us from recognizing how it continues to grow in the background. And it's been doing that quite well recently.
I mean, the woman on Tucker Carlson was literally part of a group called, quote, Gays Against Groomers. And if you look into her rhetoric, it's clear that she just equates groomers with trans people. She's literally doing LGB without the T.
Now would make, I think Joseph Mengele, I believe that was his name, Nazi doctor, this puts him to shame. They are basically using an entire generation of children as lab rats for this sick ideology, and they're full steam ahead with it, and they see us as a definite roadblock.
Literally hacking off a member of their community, making themselves weaker. And fascism tries to pit numerous groups against each other. TERFs against trans people, black people against Jewish people, and numerous others. Fascism creates this infighting. Hell, even as much as I pity them, the young men who are radicalized into fascism and enact violence are often poor working class men who've been told their whole lives they are owed something yet given nothing. And then instead of fighting back against those who do that to them, they act like police dogs, mistreated, then sicked on the enemies of those who mistreated them. Fascism wants us against each other, because fascism is weak, yet it tricks us into thinking we are weaker. It makes us afraid like it's afraid. It tries to project its fear onto us. But we don't need to be. We don't need to be scared of each other. Truth is, we are stronger together if we deny that fear and we recognize our strength in each other. It takes all of us as allies to come together to push back. We are in this together because they will not stop at just trans people. While they are currently targeting the trans community with direct ire, there have already been talks about taking away the rights of the larger gay community.
And then they try to claim, well, they might overturn Obergefell. First of all, Obergefell is a bad Supreme Court decision. And if we had a Supreme Court with itself, they would overturn Obergefell.
Taking away marriage equality, for example. They also continue to try to control the bodies of women and people of color through things like the denial of abortion rights or police violence. And if those continue to succeed, they will continue further. But we can prevent that. But we need to push back now or it will get worse for all of us. Trans people will just be the first bodies on the pile and make it that much harder to fight back. Yet, even the people who don't hate are apathetic. They say things like, I condemn all violence, but trans people need not be so loud about this. You're overreacting. They don't want to look directly at this. So they remain apathetic to the pain. Hell, I even had a conversation this week when I visited family for Thanksgiving. I was talking about my fear as a trans person, and one of my family members literally said to me, well, you're making me have to be concerned over the worries of just a few. I mean, I care about you, but, I don't think I need to get involved in your fight. But I ask you, where does that lack of desire to help others, the lack of concern when someone is telling you they are scared, where does that come from? Why do people who do care for trans people say things like, the woke left has gone too far by pointing out issues that we would rather leave unsaid in our society because it makes us feel uncomfortable, but a mass shooter enacting violence isn't seen as an indication of a larger issue. It's just seen as an individual problem that can't be connected to anything. It's because we individualize the problem and don't wish to think that these issues can affect us. It's always someone else. Those people are affected, not me. But as I said, it will come for you too. But that's what frustrates me most. What pains me the most. And honestly, it's the only thing that scares me in all of this. The ambivalence is what scares me. The hate I can understand. It makes me angry. But I know where it comes from. I see the desire for power and the systems that encourage it. And thus, by knowing what causes it, I'm not scared of it. But the ambivalence, that's the worst result of this system. Those who don't see the pain of others, or worse, those who do see the pain and yet feel nothing because they can divorce themselves from it. You out there watching this video who may not be trans, I want to speak to you for a moment. You may see me expressing myself in this video and the fear that I'm feeling or the pain that I'm feeling as unique to me or the trans community. That the fear that I feel is that of a trans person, not just that of a person. I'm not angry that you feel that way, but I do think it has been because I've been so otherized that I, as a trans person, am seen as something different, something that can be divorced from your own personal sense of community, your sense of empathy. And it's not just in mass shootings or horrific events like this that happens in. I see it in everything that I do. My voice in everything from Star Trek to nerdy videos to politics to anything else is seen as the trans perspective, the other perspective, instead of just being a single human's perspective. And this otherization isn't done out of hate, it's just how we're taught by society to see others as different, as weird or strange or just something alien to ourselves. But sometimes when we don't feel others' pain, that's also not out of hate or a lack of caring, sometimes out of too much caring. Too much empathy. We numb ourselves to pain because there's too much of it. Today we are so surrounded by death that sometimes we cut off our empathy for others, the ones that we don't immediately recognize as like ourselves, because to feel their pain means that we'll be constantly feeling pain. We see so many mass shootings that we don't care anymore. We don't feel it because we can't. It would overload us. And this system that we live in whispers that that's okay. Because it tells us that we are so different from each other, so alien, that it's all right if you don't extend your empathy to them every once in a while. And thus, when I express my pain, it is seen as something that need not be felt in your heart. Maybe you understand it. Sometimes I wonder if people feel it. But in reality, though, I am human, and I know you can feel this pain. Many of you do sometimes. And I want you to know that this pain that I feel, that I'm hopefully articulating and expressing to you, and you may feel vicariously, is not a pain that is mine given to you, but it is the exact same pain that I feel, that you feel within yourself. No one is immune to this. I too see a lot of pain that it's hard to feel it. Yet there was a moment recently that made me really scared because I actively felt that numbing. Reading that list of names on Trans Day of Remembrance, the list that just kept on going. Halfway through reading it, I just had to stop feeling because I couldn't bear it anymore. At some point, I couldn't feel the weight of it. Because if I did, it would mean feeling a piece of myself die with them. And I hated that. Every one of those names, every one of those people deserved and deserves to be felt and remembered. And yet I knew that numbing was happening to me. And it terrified me. I wanted to feel them. I want to remember them. I want to feel the emptiness of their loss. And yet it's hard. It's very hard.
I know it's hard to look at others' pain because it's scary to realize that that might be you. It's hard to look at the pain of a man who lost family in the Club Q shooting, to see how he had to realize in the moment that he and others had to enact violence, that his family had to enact violence, to protect himself and his family from violence. And how even in doing so, he still lost members of his family and community. That is always going to be the cost because that is where we are at right now. And look at this clip that I'm about to play for you. And it scares me because I realize that that might have to be me. And I understand why people don't want to recognize themselves in what you're about to see.
I went across the room and started first aid with my friend who was shot in the chest and the legs and the arms. And I told her, Joanne, stay with me. Look me in the eye. Stay with me. And I moved her head so she wouldn't see her arm because he was shot. And Chip was right there. Her husband was reaching for her. So I put her hand in his hand so that they could be together. I didn't know if they were going to make it. This guy, man. This whole thing was a lot. My daughter and wife should have never experienced combat in Colorado Springs. And everybody in that building experienced combat that night, not to their own accord, but because they were forced to. And I told my daughter, for me downrange, it was always, hey, get in the next patrol. Get in the next patrol, and you're done. They get over it. Get in the next patrol. They don't have that option. Nobody in that building has the option to get on the next patrol. They gotta live with this now until whatever it's a lot for any human, man. This kid that was helping me was kicking another human in the head, and I told him to do it. I don't know what to do, you know. There was a beautiful one of the performers was walking by when the kid was getting tired of kicking, and she helped him, kicked him with the high heels that she had on, and then ran because she's probably scared. I don't know what's going on in there. I was trying to get people to call the police, and that was it. I told the mayor, I'm not a hero. I'm just a guy that wanted to protect his kids and his wife. And I still didn't get to protect her boyfriend.
Major, you helped a lot of people. You helped a lot of people, and no one should ever go through what you or your
Humanity is caring. Humanity is seeing others. Humanity is all about the collision of our lives against each other that creates a gorgeous explosion as we intersect and interweave and dance. That beauty of colliding lives. That is humanity. So don't be ambivalent. Don't feel this pain and this loss as something separate from you. The loss of those trans people that we remembered on Trans Day of Remembrance, the loss of those at Club Q, they are not the loss of the queer community alone, but the loss of all of humanity. The loss of another connection you could have made. And that should be painful. That pain is not just Jessiegender's pain. That pain is not just transgender pain. That pain, this pain, is all of our pain, all of ours. And you deserve to feel it. Because that is human. Fascism's goal is not to see people, but to make us all be seen as dehumanized cogs for some great work. A great work for a utopia that will never come because fascism requires violence and war and decay into further fascism to continue to exist. So it must continually create enemies. And we see that wheel of new enemies being created and turning right now as this rhetoric shifts to trans people deserved to die. And we'll go even further, because if we deserve to die, well then, why not enact it ourselves? We will have to push back. We need to, in order to stop this from continuing. But I will not feed their us versus them narrative. I do not fight against something. I fight for something. I fight for my community, the queers, the nerds, the trans people, and all human beings around me. The rhetoric that they use of hate and anger and fear, it's not ours. Ours is a defense of something that we are willing to protect. Ours is a story of care, compassion, solidarity, and love. And all it takes to protect that is to just say, no, we will not accept this now, while we still have something to lose. Because you don't want to be the last one left and look around and see that everyone around you is gone. Because then you have lost the very thing that makes you most human, your connection to others. Because we've been slowly dragged away from you when you didn't even notice, because you didn't allow yourself to hear it. We, all of us, are what you have to lose. We are yours, and you are ours. So defend us, stand up for us, and be human. Hey there, everybody. So awkward transition after that, but there's a few things that I wanted to say before we wrapped out this video. The first thing is to say thank you for watching all of this. I know that it was not an easy video to listen to, and honestly, probably a very scary one. To be very honest with you, it was scary to realize that I had to write it, to feel it in my brain, to get it out on paper, and then to perform this. It's actually taken me all day to perform this video. And believe me, I am well aware that this is not going to be a fun video to edit. Nor will it be a fun one to release, because I'm sure people out there will vilify me for it. So I just will say thank you to all of you who watched it. It also actively frustrates me that I have to spend my time doing this video because I feel it is necessary, because I would much rather be making videos that inspire me and hopefully inspire others. In fact, there was a video that I was supposed to be working on this week about something that has really inspired me, even though it's been kind of about similar topics. And that's a video about Star Wars Andor that I was going to get done this week, but unfortunately I've had to delay it because I felt that this video is much more necessary right now. And that honestly really sucks. Not only because I've had to deny myself something that has been really exciting me to talk about, because I've really been excited to talk about Star Wars Andor, but also because the fact that I have to delay it means that it probably still won't be in the algorithm conversation here on YouTube when it does come back up. But such is life. But I hope that this video was worth that. In fact, I know it was worth it. I know I made the right choice. It just still sucks that I have to make that choice. It's often the position that many trans people are placed into. There we have to stop the things that we care about in order to fight back against the things that are hurting us. All of that is to say, it would really be meaningful to me if you did check out that Star Wars Andor video when it does come out, because I am actually very excited about it. That show has honestly inspired me as a creator, as a writer, as someone who cares about politics. Like, I did not expect that about a Star Wars show in the day of our Luigi 2022. But But yeah, I'm excited to have that video out. So please, if you can, check it out. Doing the other YouTube things, I just wish to say thank you to my patrons who allow me to make these choices. I would not have been able to choose to do this video over a video that I think will do better in the algorithm if I didn't have your support. So patrons, thank you for allowing me to pursue the videos that I think I have the ability and need to say. That is a gift that you have given me, and I really appreciate it. And if you appreciate these videos and you like them, I will say, if you can support me on Patreon, that does help me out. But I won't linger on that because that always makes me awkward to bring that up and to talk about it. So I'll just say thank you to my current patrons for allowing me to do this. I don't know. Normally I do the YouTube dance here, but that feels weird in a video like this. So what I will just end on is sending you love and sending you my care and sending you my solidarity, and sending you my remembrance that no matter how much pain or fear that you are in right now, know that you are not alone in it. That I feel it too, and that I'm here with you, and I am going to fight with you and for you as much as I can. Know that you are cared for. Know that you do have people who love you and care for you. And that will never, ever change. So I'll end on that. And as always, my friends, live long and prosper.
Hello there! Get it? I did the thing that Ian McGregor does. Anywho, now that I've been a giant nerd, I want to say thank you to all of my patrons who make this video and all of my videos possible. Legitimately, especially after the stuff that happened with my channel last month and dealing with YouTube, I want to reiterate how important my patrons are to me. Like, thank you. I could not do any of this without all of you. So just really, truly, and honestly, thank you for making my life possible and for making me not have to be endlessly terrified of YouTube and all of that stuff. So patrons, just mwah, I adore you. And with that said, an extra special thank you, as always, to Jolene Cassidy, Troy Stahl, Catherine Lambeth, Joe Hermanhold, Carrie Allen Foss, Emily Skorkstarter, Miranda Janelle, Lily Gray, Ashley Allen, Bo Kikio, Jason Nublar, Heather Long, Elysia Titivi, Dark Excalibur 42, Barbie Ann Rounds, Claire Newsom, Jack McAllen, Stephen Kleinard, Jem Shin, Matt Chung, Barbaruski, Mary Mello, Allie Gobert, Super Desi, Randy Thompson, Alan Altman, Spooky Heather, Sylvia, Wellington Marcus, Meadow Whisperer, D. Cassaray, Brits Krieg, Lily Blanley, Tiffany Danger, Vincent Ellington, Chloe Dollar, Felicia Tost, Joseph Dewey, James Krivda, Dominic Noble, Elizabeth Christensen, Gordon Alexander, Jose Connolly, Grace, Jennifer Fuss, Denitch, Andy with an I, Sean McKenzie, Nathaniel Fronten, Sonia Roper Doe, Hellscape, Wanderer, Jolene Cassidy, Eric Knatz, Transit Toronto, Ferengato, Mag, Ryan Hunter, Pan the Fabulous Ferret, Wendell Zabizzle, Sasha M, Raincoat Corin, Matt, Shield, Maiden, 4444, Sig Corbett, W. Randy, Edie, Damian Rice, Spencer Brownlee, Drew Bach, Angie Pugh, Stephen Richardson, Tangy Wilson, Melinda Walters, John Witherby, Naisa Marie, Fox E, Zach Prax, Cyber Quaker, Beatrix Purvis, Autumn Jennings, Lysa, Kevin Frotag, Sean Piper, Maddie H, Odd Just Odd, Flynn, Silly Christie, Epsilon is greater than, Gretchen Badger, Flying Kata Dragon, Devin Camerlock, Sarah Leslie Hutchkins, Casual Observer, Patricia Cromptitz, The Mighty Jinjojo, Marinia Hervey, Blueberry Hill, William Stewart, Julia Sweeney, Jess Johnson, Sarah Bystam, Sarah Lemero, Sky Skinner, Nathan Steele, Blue Mix Sophist, Laura Demereau, Melly-Ann Winters Good, Kurt Malin, Vertex Kai, Jordy Larisas, Here Reeses, Chris Hurst, Becky Spark, Zamula Kincaid, Troy Stull, The Tipsy Changeling, Jason Knott, Maeve, Celestia Dawn, Teresa, Strawberry Pup Tart, Geek Filter, Leotha Boyd, Holly Walters, Nikki Gordon Bloomfield, Crit Fax, Luna T, Tony the DC Nerd, Grumpy Dragon 75, Zane Sulis, Kalis, Alexandra Lombach, It's a Bug, Not a Feature, Ulrich Bogdan, Elizabeth Gradble, Abigail Marie, Unicorn Floof, James Hodge, and Corian Vale Honkanen. You all rock. Again, thank you so much. Mwah. Kisses to all of you and to all of my patrons. Seriously, could not do this without all of you. You are amazing. Goodbye there. I'm still in frame. Still in frame.
I didn't think this through.